This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I had a really big conversation with my good friend Maria Walsh, MEP and former Rose of Tralee. It's fair to say that Maria is very special, one of a kind, and someone who loves breaking new ground and loves making a difference even more. We had a huge chat about bias, carrying the rainbow flag, Mayo football, the Defence Forces, World War III, and what real leadership looks like. We also spoke about politics and your personal gold dust and how important it is to hold some of that back for yourself. Without that, you have nothing. Let's hear from Maria. Maria Walsh, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. I feel really honoured to be chit-chatting to you. I only wish it was in person, but technology is a gorgeous thing. And getting to see, well, I know it's our voices that are being picked up on this, but getting to see your face and the artwork behind you, it's a great treat on this day.
Yeah, that's a little thing that my son did. It was a photograph down in the local park. Now, unusually, now that you've gone there about artwork, he started selling his artwork online this month on this whole NFT thing.
Yeah.
Have you caught up with that whole trend yet?
I've only been reading about it, because it's being discussed more and more in Parliament. But did he find his groove within it? Because you hear some success stories where people are like, this is it, I'm on the machine. And others are like, this is so confusing, I'm getting out.
Yeah, well, I listened to a podcast just the other day. Is it some guy called Beeble, is it? Have I got the name right? And he sold a piece for $69 million through Christie's in an auction. And it's one of these NFTs. And my understanding is it's like a digital token or receipt for that item, but it can still be used by other people. It's not like having it in your front room or whatever and no one else can see it. So it's very bizarre and it's all driven by blockchain. But in Brendan's case, there's an amazing town just outside Madrid, and pre-COVID and everything. They have a festival, I think it's at the beginning of the year in February. And at the peak of the festival, these horses run through flames. They jump through fires and stuff. It doesn't sound like a very nice thing if you're a horse. But Brendan went there anyway a few years back and got the most spectacular photography from it. He signed up onto a particular NFT platform. He put the collection from his visit to this place and he sold a bunch of it and he got really, really good money. I mean, some of the pieces going for like €1,000 and stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he sold one or two bits since. So now he's thinking, maybe I should start taking more photographs.
Well, I hope there's not going to be a bill back for that piece of work behind you there then, in terms of the NFT world.
Yeah, but maybe I'll sell it unknowns to him. It is nice to see you as well, because we've had a lot of conversations and they've been online over the last year or so. You were on our Pride podcast.
Yeah.
And I know you were on a panel when we facilitated a conversation for Star Circle, which is really interesting, about bias. You put me into a category that day, by the way.
Well, I feel like I added to other conversations, but I was.
Stop eyeing me.
No. Because sometimes I get confused, and sometimes I get frustrated when we talk about biases and removal of our own biases and our own blocked mentality. Because if you're not calling it out or being curious to the language in a safe space, then nobody's ever going to learn. So sometimes I step away from things and I'm like, did I insult people or did I offer some understanding? But in many cases, it's probably the former rather than the latter.
Yeah. No, it was really interesting. I think I learned an awful lot from that conversation. And I'm not sure if you remember, one of the guys from Star Circle, he was saying that in some company, there's like a zero tolerance. And the more I kind of thought about the conversation we had after, and I was thinking that bias is inherent in all of us. It's just built in. And it's all based on lived experience. You know, mine is a 56-year-old male from Ireland, from Cork, and all that goes with it. You know, your experience is a million times different to mine. They can't be the same. Of course they're not. So we carry a bias with us. And I think if we want to embrace diversity and inclusion and all of that, instead of having zero tolerance, we need to have 100% tolerance. You know, I need to hear the words that you use. And even if I disagree with them or they're upsetting to me, I need to spend a bit of time with you to figure out, where did you come from and why do you think that way and what were those experiences? Yeah, another term that we muck into this whole conversation is that woke term. That it feels like at times there's a bunch of people on the ditch with their rifles ready and they're waiting for that word. And the minute you use that wrong word in that wrong way that offends them, boom, you know, you're taken out. And instead of going, well, that's an interesting word you used. And yeah, I feel it a bit derogatory or insulting or a bit hurtful or whatever. But I'm really curious as to why you'd have that view and use that word in that way. And I think when you kind of get deep into it, it needs to be about intent. Did you intend to hurt me when you said that thing in that way? Or is it just a bit of terminology you use, you know, coming from your own kind of lived experience? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with you. And actually, I've really thought about that conversation since, because to your point, you and I are not the same. But that's what makes us incredibly different and gifted in our own unique ways. But me, that podcast, I referenced male, pale, and stale, which is a bias in a terminology of the woke or unwoke in politics. And while on paper, given your beautiful hair color that I pay a lot of money to try to replicate myself, your age and your skin tone, on paper you fit into that category. But I also know you so much more off that page than perhaps someone listening to this or listening to that biased conversation. So I know everything you're phrasing and saying is of safety, is of curiosity, and of an absolute kindness. You know, you're not asking, you're asking to learn of the person versus the boxes that we ourselves or society has put us in. So in my own lived experience, you know, I absolutely despise the word queer. Don't know where it came from, don't know why, just don't like it. I hate the term FAG. I won't even say it. I think they're extremely derogatory.
And it's not a cigarette either.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And I should specify that for the smokers and non-smokers. But I have friends within the rainbow community that love those terms, and they identify with those terms. And I think when, to your point, if we're really going to actually take equality by the reins and sit comfortably within it, therefore we need to have open and honest conversation in safe space and be tolerant of one another versus saying, well, you know, here's my pronoun and here's my term. Absolutely. But then I don't like that term. So let's have a conversation about that and where that came from. So I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think sometimes we become too woke, too sensitive. And then on the other side, I'm like, well, maybe that the people are woke and sensitive for reasons. And my curiosity and my maturity around that curiosity needs to lead me down that path of asking those questions and hoping that the person will respond and share with me openly also. You know, it's a trusting conversation, isn't it?
Yeah. And you mentioned a lovely word, which is, being safe in that conversation and knowing that you can have it. And for me, in a way, and I was really, really curious about that discussion as well. And if you kind of think about bias and all that goes with it, I think it's quite a natural thing. for you to create an environment around you that has you feeling comfortable and safe. And if that's in a work situation where you employ people who are like you because it feels safe and it's not challenging, if it's a friend situation, you want to go out and relax and you want to have conversations in safe company and everything. If it's a sporting situation, I think there's a reason a lot of the time people like goes together, and we know that has to change. But when you do bring those changes in, it's going to introduce a little bit of discomfort for everyone on all sides of the equation. And that's where the tolerance needs to come in. And maybe we should all just put our hands up and say, well, when you introduce that discomfort because of things you're not comfortable with, that's part of it. And we need to embrace it and live in the discomfort and accept that at times people are going to be offended by something that someone says or does that wasn't meant with any bad intention. But it just probably came from a naive, I won't say uneducated, but unexperienced place. And you need to embrace discomfort in a way, don't you?
Absolutely. It's a phrasing that when I got elected first in 2019, that I had in my brain, I had lived it but not fully understood it. And it is that lifelong learning piece that we perhaps, or I perhaps, I don't want to generalize either, because I think I might be doing a disservice to the conversation as I'm saying, like, stop everybody generalizing and let's all become mates. But, there's times where I live between the world of, well, I got my education through primary, secondary, and third level. But your lived experience is a part of that lifelong journey, academics, of people, of places, of culture, of all those things. And we are ignorant of our own capability if you think you're going to transition into any part of your life and not think that you're going to grow and be challenged and be uncomfortable in a safe or a growing environment. If you asked me 2 days ago, will I be the same person in 2 days? Absolutely not. Because we're constantly being challenged, shifted and probed and evolving. So therefore, there has to be, to your point, there has to be a space then, be an unspoken or spoken space where you are asking questions, or you've said something and you're thinking, okay, in a few days, looking back, God, I've really emerged. Like I that's so far away from what I think now, because I've had information, conversation, or lived experiences to evolve that. And that's probably one of my fears with social media, particularly with young people, because the Twitter machine is a cesspot for absolute BS. And you have people who are reacting, myself included at times, and then 24 hours, 6 months, a year later, you're like, whoa, I was really off target. And then that narrative, then, if you're in public role or you're thinking about it in particular, that becomes your shackle in many ways. And I sometimes struggle with that when I talk to younger people or talk about the world of digitalization or lifelong learning. You're thinking, Jesus Christ, we're not offering any sort of safety space for people to continue on that lifelong learning journey, because we hold them ransom when they're not woke enough at the time we want them to be woke at. Am I rambling here, Greg?
No, I don't think you were.
Back into Spotify.
Yeah, I think, and again, it's a generalization, but I think in a way there's a generation where you're told, no, if you don't like it, you speak up. But you kind of need to speak up from an experienced place. Actually, I saw a clip online recently with Barack Obama taking on that whole kind of woke thing. And he was just saying he wished people would put as much effort into learning and having conversations with people instead of just firing missiles every time a particular word is being used in a way that doesn't suit them or that breaks their rule book. Oh my God, that's not allowed. You're not allowed to say that. Bang, done. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And you mentioned social media and something like Twitter. It's a pity, because if that was used in a positive way and if our etiquette around it was better and more tolerant, you could actually learn and you could have conversations with people from all over with different perspectives. But instead, bang, it just goes to a hostile place immediately. And that's going to learn behavior on those, which is really, really poor. Yeah, I remember the early discussions with Twitter and people saying, oh my God, it's terrible, the conversations on there. And should you get rid of them in exactly the same way that we were given voices? There's a voice, use it, and it's up to you how you use it and the words you put against it. And you're kind of thinking, okay, well, I should bring that rationale and logic to Twitter, and having conversations or arguments or discussions with people that you don't know from Adam. But straight away, you're like, bang, all guns blazing about whatever that thing is.
It's nuts when you think about it, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, we're willing to mind our P's and Q's when the teacher's given out to us in school for getting your homework wrong, but knowing you probably got it right. She just will corrected the wrong thing. But yet we're willing to jump on a tweet with such venom for not being seen on a virtual space that you never get seen.
Yeah.
It's nuts, really. My philosophical mindsets when I'm flying to and from the airports, and you spend a lot of time on your own and you're contemplating life and listening to podcasts, and then going, God, are we all turning more and more nutty as the day goes on?
Yeah.
Keep wondering.
Yeah, it's a big question to ask. And are we making progress or are we not? And the Ukraine and Russia kind of brings us back to that very point in a while. So what I'd like to do for a little bit is to get the listener to get to know you and some of the bits that they don't know. So who the hell are you and where did you come from?
That's a big philosophical question, and as someone who is a champion of talk therapies, I could answer that question with a couple of different personalities at this point as I'm trying to unpick who am I and where did I come from and where I'm going. But for anybody listening, I'm 34 years young. There's days I feel 34 years old. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, in a very small suburb town just outside the city, to Irish parents. Well, a father from Ireland, family of 10 from a small rural community in Mayo. And my mother, who's also from a family of 10, but 8 of the 10 were born back in Connemara, so Gaelic speakers, and the younger 2, herself and her younger brother, were born in America and then did the typical Irish thing, came back, went back over. And long story short, both parents met at the Catskills at an Irish festival. My mother, a pioneer, she says my father was one of the drunkest men in the bars. So that is a sense where, and I share all of that because many people probably don't know. I talk about my parents quite a bit. My family, we're quite tight-knit. We're quite a modern family now. We moved back to Ireland when I was 7, 4 kids.
What were your mum and dad doing in the States? What brought them there?
So my dad is a carpenter by trade and ended up in New York, was actually heading to Australia, and then a sister of his, called home to say, if Vincent goes to Australia, you'll never see him again. So my grandfather had said, right, you're only going to America and that's the only choice. And I say that because no doubt we'll get on a little bit to the to and fro where I've been around the world. And you think if my sister or my father told me you're not going there because we'll never see you, I'd be like, get out of it there. Let me off and mind your own business. But that just goes to show you how as a country and as a community we've evolved. But long story short, my dad, construction, a carpenter by trade. My mother had 4 children and wrongfully didn't and hasn't gotten the credit one deserves when you work in the home, and working as my dad's secretary, accountant, PR agent and all those things. But they decided after having 4 of us, my older brother was about to go in, Kevin was about to go into high school, decided that they were going to fulfill their lifelong dream and move to Ireland and raise their children. So we moved from a suburb town outside Boston to a small, as I like to say, cosmopolitan area, a small village called Shrule, just on the border between Mayo and Galway.
Is that accidental? Did they have connections to there? Did they?
No, they had bought a farm. My dad had bought a farm in 87 just outside Shrule, but they had originally, I guess, had planned to live. So my mother has family in Connemara, my dad has family in Roundfort. There's about an hour and 15 minutes of a drive and a difference, maybe a little bit more. And they had agreed that they would split it. So they would live at the halfway mark. We now, and have always lived in my time in Ireland, 15 minutes away from my father's neck of the woods and about an hour away from my mother's. So you can imagine how that worked out. And she never lets him forget it 25 years on. But yeah, for us, it was a small village. And
how old were you when you came back?
I was 7. So quite a life-changing age, I've been told, in terms of that belonging piece. So I feel American and I feel Irish. And then subsequently, over the years, living in New York and Philadelphia, and then being a part of a little festival called the International Rose of Tralee, which I know you know very well, the pendulum swung a little bit more Irish. But I always found a happy balance in being both. Throw in a little character also with being pro-European, considering the day job now. But yeah, for me, growing up, we were the first blow-ins into a small community in Tralee, which is so amazing to think. I remember a friend of mine at the time, I wasn't long in the national school, and she grabbed me by the hand. She's like, come over here. And she'd introduced me to the Fossman. And she's like, speak, like talk. And it was my accent, my quite Americanized accent at the time, that they were all in stitches laughing. And when you think in 2022, there's about 37 nationalities in Tralee now, in this very, very small pocket. I call it the Bermuda Triangle, because in constituency land, in politics, we're owned by a couple of different constituencies. We are Bermuda Triangle. But yeah, I grew up here. My dad refused to get a sheepdog for many years, and therefore his 4 children were sheepdog. He participated in part-time farming, which he still does now, and that's the land we're living on now. And yeah, and I always loved farming, always loved it. When I was in my teenage years, I would always help Dad round up the sheep or the cattle. I got paid big money back in the day. I think it was £20 for a couple of Saturdays working in the mart. And what I used to do is load and offload sheep onto trailers. And I always remember when people ask me where the personality came from, sometimes negatively, sometimes positively, I often think of my time within the farming world, because the fact that you're a female and a young girl on in a mart or on a farm already has questions flying. And then the fact that you're eager to help and do something, because I didn't like to be bored, also raised some eyebrows. So I remember at the time the big books had just come in where the tag numbers were on and they had changed. So a lot of the farmers couldn't load the sheep, but then also couldn't see the tags. So then they had to use me as I was hanging around waiting to be busy. But yeah, I loved it, and I still do. I have since moving back to Ireland full time, I've gotten a little bit more into farming. So currently doing a master's in agriculture and extension and innovation with UCD online for my sins, and I did my Green Cert, which is the farm management course with Chagas. And really, that was just because I wanted my brain to do something that is not political and to switch off, even though farming is probably one of the most political things in our country, and particularly in the European Union. But
does working on the land and living there, of course, does that ground you in a particular way?
Absolutely. I didn't fully appreciate it until the pandemic hit. Having friends in New York or Philly or London or Dublin even, and the quality of air or space or greenery was so much richer where I was, because we live on just under 60 acres. So for me, my quarantine over various periods, or my 5K limit, included green fields and animals that loved to see if you had a bucket of feed. So you instantly felt the love, even though it was all fabricated because you had food. So they only see the food, but the instant gratification is always nice. But yeah, it's grounding. The fact that I don't see it as myself, but I certainly see it in my dad and his brothers who are full-time farmers, that custodian of the land piece, the colours of grass, the stone walls, all of that creates a narrative. I feel like I'm going to start singing the N17 by the Saw Doctors here, but it's incredibly humbling, and you miss it. I mean, there's a reason why those who come home from our ever-growing Irish communities, that is our diaspora, comment on the green fields and the patchwork of them when you fly in. Like, there's a reason for that. And I think rural living, is not highlighted or given its credit as it should do.
Yeah, I think there's a depth to people who come from the country. And I notice it. I really notice it. And there's just something more going on. Maybe it's that lived experience again, that thing you learn, not from people, but from, the ground under your feet, and I suppose the animals and the sea. I'm thinking of West Cork when I say that kind of thing. But I notice the difference between people, and there's just other layers that you learn from what's around you. I'm not sure why that happens.
No, but to your point, I mean, but I think our Irish communities have it in droves, but in particular rural communities. I remember Joe McHugh, who in our political world was a former minister, now deputy in Donegal, and I took to him when I got in politics because he talked about the term mehel quite a bit. So that community spirit, that leaning on one another so beautifully. And he spoke about it at an event that I had held when I was putting my hand up and getting involved in politics. And the fact that I came from a community, and I didn't grow up in politics. I grew up in community activism. Mehel was incredibly important. In Shrule, I know everybody who lives in the houses because many of them in many ways raised me or kept an eye on what was going on or was always at stuff. So you had that ever-growing Irish family in that Mehel spirit of belonging. And I think there's a difference for sure.
How did the Rose of Tralee come about, and what were you doing at the time?
The Rose of Tralee, as I said, I moved back to Ireland when I was 7 and fell into, every summer there's this thing called the Rose of Tralee on the TV, and I probably missed it for the first few years, but I remember being in 1998, I was 12 or 13, and a woman called Mindy O'Sullivan won. But she wore the Galway sash. She was a Mayo person, but at the time of structures in the festival, if you were selected, Connacht almost became Galway, if that makes sense. So I remember watching the TV on my head rested in my hands and legs kicked up underneath me and thinking like, wow. I mean, first and foremost, her mom was from the Philippines. Her dad was from Mayo. She was phenomenally beautiful, still is. And she's the thickest Mayo accent, which only made me love her more. And I remember, standing at the end of the driveway and thinking, wow, like the Rose of Tralee lives half an hour down that road. And at the time I was mind blown. Like, it was phenomenal that it was so close. Fast forward a couple of years. And at that point, I always said, it was like a seed being planted in the most romantic way I can phrase that at some point, if somewhere became a home for me, I'd love to try it out. I was in New York for a couple of years in my early 20s. It didn't feel like me. I moved to Philadelphia for a job, fell in love with the city. And because I was downtown Philly and working for an American company, I missed the crack. I missed the Irish personality that is so native and it's so hard to find in other cultures. And I was playing football for the Notre Dames at the time, but I wanted to meet other communities. So I put my hand up and got involved in the Rose of Tralee in 2012. I just moved to the city and was unsuccessful in the first year. So then I said, well, fair play. That's it. That's me done. Delighted with myself. And then fast forward 2014, and I got a phone call to say, listen, we're down a girl or two. Can you put your name in? And I was like,
we're stuck.
No. It's like, yeah, it was that conversation. I was like, no problem. I'll be, happy to volunteer, sell tickets, do whatever you need. And they're like, no. And I remember it being said, don't worry, Maria, you'll never win. And what is worse is I was like, I know, she'll be grand. So I arrived, didn't tell a soul, didn't tell me how mother, who still to this day reminds me of that, and went with the purpose of, I'm here to serve because I was called and this is a great volunteering opportunity. I had lived the experience, so I was good. Fast forward anyways, I'm standing on the stage and the MC was like, representing Philadelphia in 2014 will be. And then my name came out. And I remember being ushered to the front of the stage and being told, so who's here with you? And I was like, shit, there's nobody here with me. And I said, probably in hindsight now, upon reflection, my first political line, I said, sure, when we're in a room full of Irish, aren't we all friends here? I.e., like, move on, buddy. There's nobody. And he kept pressing, no, really, who's with you? And thankfully, at the corner of my eye, I could see a Mayo flag down the back of the room. And I just said Mayo, and this whole community who had moved out to Philly in the 40s, 50s, and 60s from Belmullen and Achill and Clare Island area were there. And I was adopted instantly and saved, thankfully. And long story short, became, for many, the 2014 International Rose of Tralee a couple of months later.
And if that didn't happen, what would your path have been? What was in your head?
Oh, my path had been live in the States. I was flirting around the area of joining the Defence Forces in the States for a long time.
I saw that you were a member of the Irish Reserve and up in the Curragh and doing all of that kind of good stuff for a while.
I love the identity of the Defence Forces. Not so much game on the whole weaponry, but I respect anybody who knows how to use it and certainly knows how to control using it. But for me, I always remember growing up, and probably 9/11 impacted me because I was in secondary school and we were the only American family in the school at the time. And looking back, it probably had a more profound impact on my life than I gave it credit for at the time. And serving and being that honorable person, the team mentality, the travel opportunity, the career progression, all of that was in my nature. But then I got older. And when I moved to New York first and then to Philly, the army recruiters there seemed more like on commission than they did in my welfare. And for me, it never stuck then. And I kept chasing jobs that were presenting different opportunities and then the Rose happened. And after the Rose finished in 2015, I decided to move back to Ireland for 1 year only and try and make a go of what the festival had gifted me on. And then randomly seen an advert for the Reserve Defence Forces, knowing that I was too old if I left it any later, and definitely unfitter than I'd ever been. But I threw my name in, and for a very short period of time,
your Defence Forces clock was ticking.
It was, and it was a phenomenal. Probably one of the greatest regrets of getting elected. The only regret of getting elected is I had to resign as a member of the Reserve Defence Forces. In all my experiences, both privately and publicly, my short term in the Reserve Defence Forces, I probably learned the most about myself.
What did you learn?
I learned that resilience looks very different on people. I learned that you can be a leader, but you don't have to be in front of the pack. I learned that each and every one of us has different qualities, and the ebbs and flows and that pendulum and how it swings has a profound impact on teams and the mentality of them. I learned patience because, bear in mind, I was coming in my 30s, if not on them, and I was training with 18, 19, 20-year-olds who it was the first time them leaving their houses. And I learned how quickly I became frustrated at things at the start and how I needed to find my own path of existing within that also. And I could never understand what a label or a nameplate had on my life. I was never big into labels or, in terms of the fashion world, even though I worked in it. But having the tricolour, having the Defence Force on my lapel was something of great profoundness. I only wish I did it sooner.
Okay. Might you have stayed doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's volunteer led, and I love volunteerism. So I used to do some crazy stuff. I went to the Curragh to be a part of 1ACS originally because I thought nobody would know me up there, not a hope. And I quickly realized that the Rose of Tralee actually is watched by many, many different people. And at the time, given a lot of things aligned to me, be it my sexuality or being a pioneer, some members of the Defence Forces watches the Rose of Tralee, so you were known before it, which is a lovely thing, but not so lovely when you're the unfittest and you're not doing push-ups rightly because then they quickly find you out. But yeah, I think I would be doing it, going into the Curragh every Thursday evening for training and doing weekends. I mean, there's an energy about that I only loved. But opportunity came in different shapes and forms, and I understood fully when one door opens, the other door has to close sometimes, and that was that for me in the reserves.
Yeah, and going back to the Rose of Tralee, the LGBT flag.
Yeah.
Did you grab it, or was it handed to you?
That's a great question, actually. Because what people might not understand, and I get asked this question sometimes in schools in the sense of, but did they know and why did you hide it? You know, I never hid my sexuality. It'd be very different if I was not out with my family and friends and then all of a sudden on the banner ad of the news, I was out. But I had been living as a gay woman for maybe about 2.5 years before then. I was in a relationship that had just recently ended quite dramatically, like all great first loves.
I know, heartbreak.
Heartbreak. There was heartbreak, and you could probably tell in the voice. I was the one that got heartbroken, but I grew so much within that, and it was my first female experience. And looking back, I probably compartmentalized the various things that make me now back then, because for me, sexuality is just an extension of me. I chose to be a pioneer. I chose to abstain from alcohol. I didn't choose to become gay. I am it. So I would introduce myself as being a pioneer and a diehard Mayo fan for the death of me. Then I would introduce myself as being an LGBTQI woman. Nowadays, and at the time, you know, being a gay woman was unfortunately the only thing people resonated with me, and that's fine. It was an evolving conversation. We were discussing and debating marriage equality in this country. In many ways, perhaps serendipitously, the stars aligned, and I was able, maybe to one or two people, show that you could be gay and you could wear dresses and be a part of the Rose of Tralee and have short hair and tattoos and be a diehard Mayo fan. Like, you could be many things, because we are many things. But at the time, I didn't realize the seriousness of being handed the rainbow flag, the qualities of that rainbow flag being held by, you know.
It sounds to me like part of it was you didn't want to live a lie, which is quite a different thing to, I'm going to grab this flag now and start waving it on behalf of everyone. That wasn't your gig, but it became your gig in a funny way, didn't it?
It did. And you know, like, if I was in a relationship now, I would happily introduce myself as, oh, here's my partner, or, you know, here's my girlfriend. But at the time, I wasn't in any. And bear in mind, I had just gone through severe heartbreak. So for me, I was like living the best crack, the best experience. And my sexuality wasn't to the fore because I wasn't in anything with anybody. And in many ways, probably still figuring out who I was and how I wanted to show up in this world. And then the Rose happened. And while it was an apolitical festival, and still very much is, I think they were glutton for punishment when they picked me, because, you know, I certainly took my grey areas. But it's funny, Greg, you know, I think we've talked about this before. You know, over the Rose year and since, to some circles in the rainbow community, I'm not gay enough. To others, I didn't do enough around the marriage equality. I didn't grab hold of the rainbow flag enough and actually make a difference. And then to others, I had one or two small conversations with parents just to alleviate some pressures when their own kid came out. So I have come to terms with the fact that you can't keep anybody and everybody happy, and how I show up every day in a conversation, particularly around my sexuality, and in particular with younger people, and how they ask and how they question themselves, and the space they need to do that in, I don't take for granted. But it's sometimes a real challenge.
Is there a lot of times you prefer just not to have that conversation? Thanks a million. I'm just Maria.
I would never regret it, because it, you know, my orientation made me who I am. But I think when you come into public life, particularly in politics, the expectations are different, and they're unspoken expectations. And hell, more than likely, I probably own most of the expectations that I place on myself. But it's a horrible life, I think, for someone to come into. You know, I chose this path. I decided to put my hand up to become the Rose of Tralee. I decided to get into politics. my family and my what I hope would be my future partner didn't. And sometimes I question the trade-off of that, if that makes sense.
I remember bumping into you in O'Connell Street on a hotel there. I think we were doing a social media session with the client and you bumped in. Was that in the middle of, I don't know, you were in Dublin for something. Was that before the elections? You had a bit of a team with you. It was all a buzz. And
Yes.
as usual, beautiful Maria, buzzing, full of the joys of it. From that day to now, what has your experience been? Is all that buzz there and all the energy there and everything else?
I wish. No, I mean, it's funny. Probably on the for truthful and transparent conversations. I think since I've entered into politics, it's been hard to find my groove within it. With the Rose of Tralee, it was different. You know, it was about igniting and being a part of conversations of difference. It was about pushing beyond the boundary of what might other people think and I might think. And in some ways, the purpose was it was quite similar, but very different, if that makes sense. In the political realm, I've never worked harder to try and keep my feet on the ground. And I've never worked harder to try and keep the why I got involved in this, because I understand how and why people begin to switch off and only say what's being put in front of them because it's safer. Sometimes it's easier. The pace of it is very different. You're afraid. To your point earlier on, you know, you get held to a ransom if you said it this way and you didn't say it that way, and people get offended. And I can see where politics, because I can see it in myself, you get more and more cautious, not indifferent, but cautious of how things will play out. And that's terribly sad sometimes because...
But it's probably for good reason, is it? If you want to survive this game.
Protection, boundaries, survival. But there's an element of crack and the glint in the eye that I feel sometimes I lose. And I think COVID has probably expedited that too, and exacerbated, I should say, more, because you're not around people. You're not around that energy. And I love that. You know, I love being out in crowds, not necessarily being the center of it. I actually much prefer to be in the back of the room having the chats with the lads, or, you know, down having the chats with like school kids and learning what the cool word is on the playground. You know, that type of conversation versus being on a podium. I feel much more confident in the former than the latter. But you lose elements of yourself. And I remember Tara Rafter, who is the navigation coach, a talk therapist here in Mayo. She'd said something really fascinating once, that, you know, as you go out into the world, you leave little gold dust in different places. And I couldn't agree with her more. But sometimes I often wonder, have I literally dumped the bag of gold dust in places and then forgot to keep a little bit in reserve for myself? But I think that's a part of a new job too. I think it's a part of the world we live in, and trying to find that sense of belonging that I've always been challenged with since I was a kid.
Does it work? The structure, the voting, our democracy, the parties, that European structure, does it work, and is it capable of doing the job it's supposed to be doing?
I mean, there's some things like, I don't know when this will go out, but right now we're living through a World War III, and we need to face facts and call it that. And actually, we've been in it for a long time. To your point, I think people just turned a blind eye in 2014 when Crimea was taken over, and a lot of other movements by Putin or China or where else, you know. But when you see the mobilization of how quickly the European Union has come together in terms of COVID, or in Ukraine right now, it's phenomenal. But ultimately, people have some national interests too, and you have to appreciate that. I've seen great discussions and debates work. I've seen others that feel like a bit of a paper pushing exercise, and that's frustrating, because for me, mental health is incredibly important, but we don't see it as a competency of the European Union. So therefore, you make all these calls, you put all these requests out, you try and drive things, but then it's down to a member state to see the positives of it and the opportunities within it. And that's the disconnect. I think the European Union, I don't think Ireland economically would have been where it's at without it. But I think we have a hell of a lot more work to do in the social elements and the threading piece of our societies in order for the European Union to really make the impact that I know it can make it because I stood for it.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of this wonderful, passionate, bright, enthusiastic, I don't know, 28, 29-year-old. And she wants to do this political thing. and I'm looking at her and I care deeply about her. And I'm saying, listen, it's going to sap the spirit out of you. It's going to crush you. You are meant for better things than this. If you were the one having that conversation with that bright-eyed Maria Walsh with all of her buzz and energy and everything, would you really give her a good talking to, would you?
I'd give her a more honest talk.
Okay.
I often joke about, I read the terms and conditions before applying for the job, like everybody should. But the lived experience, to what we shared at the earlier point of this conversation, the lived experience is a completely different education than what you can get on a black and white sheet of a page or from another tongue. I would certainly make her more aware to the sacrifices of it. There's times I joke where I walk into the parliament and I walk back out 14, 16 hours later and I don't know whether I got a high five or a kick in the arse. Sometimes it's both at the same time. And you often wonder, did you move the needle any bit closer to where it needs to be? And you feel like you're taking 2 steps forward and 165 steps back. And the political machine moves at such a slow pace compared to society and digital medias around it. Well, then within the same breath, I can say to that same person, if you didn't stand in your fear and you didn't stand within the opportunity of it, and you didn't believe that by having different voices from different experiences around the conversation table, if you didn't have that, nothing changes. And that is essentially where you see the political title plates moving now. You see a young guy in Ukraine who's less about power and more about movement. You see a white guy over the road who is an absolute sociopath. And who is right and who is wrong? Well, I hope you all know where I stand on that one. But if you're not pushing that needle, then the needle will, of course, never change. But the sacrifice is fierce. And I would probably just tell her all of that.
Well, you're on the Win Happy podcast. And for me,
yeah.
Part of that happiness is that feeling that you are making a difference. And I remember I got my dream job. I moved to work for Guinness in St. James Gate. And you're like, oh my God, it's going to be incredible. And I was there for 3 years. And I started with all of the buzz, and because I was the general manager of a smaller Guinness-owned company, total autonomy, great fun. You could make things happen. It was incredible. And here I didn't even know how to order stationery. It was just so complex and, everything. And the car park opposite St. James Gate, we used to call it the DWD. And every day you park your car and you walk up that hill and you go through those doors and you hope that you'll make a bit of a difference that day. That walk up every day used to kill me because I knew, I'm making no difference whatsoever. And even though it was a great job and everything, I knew it was going to kill me if I was going to continue operating in that place and, not make a difference in just meetings about meetings and meetings. The most wonderful time, and I learned loads and some great people. I really, really did, and friends to this day. And actually all of the colleagues we worked with, you see them, they nearly all have fantastic jobs and other kind of institutions and all of that stuff. But it was killing me. Yeah, but I know you will make a difference, and I know you have to, and I know there's so much in you. And back a little bit to earlier conversation about male, pale and stale. Is that what happens, Maria? That to survive this stuff, I mean, the long, long haul? Or is that a result that they become these broken people who turn up in their good roles and they're wearing the suits and they feel semi-important and, meals and functions and all that kind of thing? And does those little breadcrumbs just sustain you at that stale, exhausted level? I'm not sure.
I think we could probably do another whole hour on
we shouldn't go there.
No, but I think, I know there's fantastic people who have served their entire lives to the political wellness of their community. I also know sometimes you have to play the game in order to survive the game. And to your point, I think a little piece of you chips away every time that happens. Or, you might have to vote a certain way because the ultimate, you need this in order to get there. But that's not how that looks and that's not how it plays out. Or you need to attend this event in order to make sure that person attends your event because you need to make the impact. And within all of that, exchanges are made. Currency is being shared. And sometimes the payback never comes, and sometimes it comes too little, and you do leave little sparks of yourself around the place.
It's probably why they call it service, isn't it?
Yeah. I think, but I also think a cohort of people who gets attracted to this public service are people who are looking for support within their own inner child, not to make it too talk therapy heavy, but there are personalities who are attracted to the podium for various reasons, and sometimes they shout the loudest, or they come across most aggressive, or they're better at faking it till you make it, and then you wonder, then was the payoff worth it? And I guess for me, I try and I'm only 2.5 years young, and there's days where I'm like, absolutely F this. I'm pulling my hair out going, I just don't know how to show up here authentically. But like everything, you got to surround yourself, much like you going to that job, you got to surround yourself with people who you feel you can journey with and who keep you honest. And sometimes that's actually over the last 2.5 years has been the hardest, because my expectations of politics and politicians is sometimes different to the reality.
And maybe, Maria, if we're being very realistic about it, and maybe look at all of this with a different lens, we're recruiting at the moment.
Well, the position be open to 2024 still.
Of course it will.
I might be moving down to Cork then.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's done. Deal done. But you look at the CVs and you want some experience. And if you've got someone who's punched in 2 years in this particular industry, you're thinking, okay, they're kind of starting. 2 years isn't an awful lot of time. You're learning the ropes. You're starting to get a feeling for the atmosphere and all that kind of thing. If it's a more senior person, you're looking for 5 years plus. So in a funny way, you're early doors, aren't you? And trying to learn this totally new world and career and how it works, and it's in an international context. There was no training course that you were sent to.
No, I mean, to your point, absolutely not. And I'm grateful you're reminding me of that too, because there's times where I'm sitting in rooms and frustrated at myself. My inner dialogue is at times the worst. And you're frustrated at yourself because you're not coming to the point fast enough, or your political acumen is just a beat off where everybody else is. And you're trying to find your way and see what is bullshit and what is real. And that takes experience and time.
Yeah, and you don't want to mess it up, because if you do, your credibility is shot.
Absolutely. And then you end up going down the ladder while also trying to get up the ladder, and then the reason why in many ways then becomes so much more intoxicating, because there's more times in the early stages of everybody's career where you're pulling your hair out going, am I doing this right or am I doing this wrong? And I don't want to ask for help, but I need to ask for help. Otherwise, I'm never going to progress. And that new infancy space is where I've been living in for 2.5 years. And sometimes I forget to say, catch your breath. You're doing okay today. Tomorrow will be a little bit easier and better because of the lived experience that you had the day prior. But at the time, that's a harder conversation to master than not.
And I guess give yourself credit. It is a long game. Part of that is establishing trust and relationships, and you're a go-getter, so maybe be a bit patient with yourself.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, of course you are. Well, I did say you're on the Win Happy podcast. So what's happiness to you, Maria?
Happiness is contentment in oneself.
Okay. Now, I'm going to give a Mayo football analogy.
Yeah. Don't be breaking my heart now. I'm already living in a war. Don't be upsetting me.
There's a song about that. Yeah, so they all love playing football. But without goalposts, it's kind of pointless. So putting the ball in the back of the net and getting that elation, those winning moments, what would they look like for you?
I mean, I was going to kick back to say I was always a defender by my curvaceousness and my strength. I was always a defender. So I was never really the target person. I was more the team shouter. But goalposts, in the last couple of years, probably in the role that I'm in now and the challenges of it, the goalposts have become really internal and not necessarily about being in a certain role or in a certain position and reaching a certain podium. It's been more about harnessing and honing in on that authenticity that I think we all possess within our own being. That sense of belonging piece I've been really trying to figure out within myself for a long time, and the goalpost there is just to find that pure and simple life where you wake up on most days and you feel the grass beneath your feet and a nice sweater on your back and a good cup of coffee. And at some point along the way, Mayo win the All-Ireland and losing your voice for a month because of screaming. But that to me is the goalposts. I've been so fortunate with opportunity. I don't know where they came from or how they came, but I'm so fortunate for them. And I'm also so fortunate in at times, perhaps my stupidity and the audacity that I had to put my hand up and get involved without serving any sort of apprenticeship, this role in particular that I'm in. But I think as the world gets louder, my goalposts get narrower, and I want to feel content within myself in that noise. And that for me would be the ultimate goalpost.
Do you think you can preserve who you are and still have all that guile and that tenacity and make that difference without it like squashing your soul? Because without that, it's not going to happen either.
Yeah, no, and you're very kind. I think you have to, but it's the boundaries you put around yourself that either makes you survive it or deny it, or celebrate in it, I should say. There is times though when I go out and I speak at schools or businesses, or you're stopping people on the street who like me, who didn't grow up in politics, and you're like, we need you to run, or we need you to get behind a candidate, and I step away going, Jesus Christ, am I trying to remove the sparkle from more people just to fit in? But in actual fact, I think we need more people with all of that in every sector, but particularly our politics. I think emotion has been missing from our politics for a long, long time. And often I feel the decimal mark in a figure has been the driving force. But that's not how we operate as people. It's not. We're social beings, we're emotional beings. And we need that in our politics now more than ever. And
yeah, and there's a bit of calibration going on at the moment anyway, and I think people are seeing what real leadership looks like.
Yeah.
And all the fun and games, and they're looking to the resilience of the people from Ukraine and their leader, what real leaders do. They don't get whisked away safely, they stay there, and Yeah, they walk the streets and they do their thing. I heard Michael Keaton at some award ceremony. I'm not sure if you saw that. And he accepted an award for something, and he held up it was like a statue of a person. And he was saying that this is for the real leader out there, and when we salute you. And I think coming from the United States, when they've been putting up with something that was just incredibly horrible and disgusting for over 4 years, and making a joke of everything about leadership, it was refreshing to hear it. I have one last question for you.
Yes.
It's a whopper.
If this is, will Mayo ever win the All-Ireland? I'm going to go through the screen. I'd say, of course they are.
Of course they are. Of course they are. What was your best day?
My best day. Damn it, Greg, why did you ask me this question?
I'll go downstairs and put on the kettle and have a coffee, and I'll be back in about 20 minutes and leave you rack your head with that one.
Do you know what? I remember, I tell you what my best day was. One of my best days. My mother, as I shared, is from Connemara, and my uncle, Pat, is a fisherman. And I was able to spend summers on a small little curragh boat out on small islands off Connemara. And one summer, it was one of those random hot summers, my cousins and I headed out on this boat, and there was the throwaway barbecues, and there was enough food to feed us for a week. And as we were heading out, a bunch of dolphins gathered around the boat. And I've never felt so insignificant in the sense of the space of the ocean and these animals. And I never felt more content in the space of experiencing it with my family. And we grew up as cousins. And since then, unfortunately, have lost one. That's my ladybugs in the back of my ear. Teresa, who passed away in 2009. Yeah, that was a pretty significant day.
Maria, thank you so much for coming on the Win Happy podcast. I love you.
Oh, I love you too.
I do.
Oh, and I must say, you reminded me, I was coming out of Strasbourg plenary last month, and I was reading your blog on saying I love you to people, be an animal or foe or friend. And you put a really happy stamp on a very weird and sad day. So I love you back, and thanks for sharing your lived experiences.
Yeah, and you too. Says the male, pale and stale guy.
I'm going to regret saying that to you forever now.
Yeah. It's so funny. I was like, oh my God, this is just terrible. And there's a few guys I know, they're two economists, and I had them on the podcast last year a few times, Chris Johns and Jim Power. And they're a great duo. And I was thinking, I'm going to ask them to come on the podcast now, and we're going to talk about male, pale and stale, and what does that feel like, and how dirty. Listen, I do love you. Thank you so much.
Love you too. Right back at you.
Take it easy.
Mind yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.